lifting holy hands to you, as I pledge my love anew. I worship you in spirit.
Oh, I worship you.
I worship you in truth.
Make my life a holy
Make my life a holy praise unto you. On bended knee we come, with a humble heart we come, bowing down before your holy throne, lifting holy hands to you, as we pledge our love anew. We worship you in spirit.
Oh, we worship you.
We worship you in truth.
Make our lives a holy
Make
praise.
our lives a holy praise unto you. Make our lives a holy praise unto you. The Lord thy God, in the midst of thee, is mighty, is mighty. The Lord thy God, in the midst of thee, is mighty. And I saw him, high and lifted up, with power and grace and authority. And he shall reign in the midst of thee, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord thy God, in the midst of thee, is mighty, is mighty. The Lord thy God, in the midst of thee, is mighty, is mighty. And I saw him, high and lifted up, with power and grace and authority. And he shall reign in the midst of thee, forever and ever. Amen. Forever and ever. Amen. Amen. Blessed be your name in a land that is plentiful, where your streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name when I'm found in the desert place. Though I walk through the wilderness, blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be your name when the sun's shining down on me, when the world's all as it should be. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name on a road marked with suffering, though there's pain in the offering. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Your light rode through my night, restored exceeding joy. Your grace fell like the rain and made this desert live. You have turned my mourning into dancing. You have turned my sorrow into joy. You have turned my mourning into dancing. You have turned my sorrow into joy. Your hand lifted me up. I stand on high.
Two. Testing 1, 2.
Can you hear me now?
Check, 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 check,
All right.
check,
I'm on.
check, check.
Hey.
All right, we are going to get going with our class today. It's great to hear all the chatter. To continue with our series that we've been doing here in the auditorium on finding hope at the breaking point. As we enter the study, we shared just 3 basic ideas that we wanted to make sure we were covering. And one was to just simply give the context to the moment that we're in. Because we do feel like we're in a moment where people are trying to find themselves. They're trying to figure out what's new. I don't know whether you think we're in the middle, near the end, or we're done, or we're still just getting started. But I'm sure there'd be all kinds of different opinions on where things are, but there's no doubt that society and people's thinking process has changed during this time that we've been in. But mostly we wanted to be able to look at the Bible, look at examples in the Bible to find examples of hope, where we can find hope in crisis, hope in a breaking point. And then hopefully as well, first off, maybe we ourselves can find a way to deal with different things, but then we can also share with others and help others find hope for themselves and their life. So we've been looking at a number of different stories. Last week we looked at life at the edge with Moses. We looked at how he interceded for others, how even though he was persecuted and targeted there later on, as they began to think about going into the promised land, and then they had to revert from that. But he was attacked, and he still interceded on behalf of Israel. He was offered the opportunity to start over by God, and I'll just create a new group of people around you. And he said, no, let's stick with the plan. What would people think? if we did that. So it's a powerful, powerful story. We've looked at a number of different stories as well throughout the Bible where we've seen how God works in crisis and how God is available for folks and shapes people through this time of difficulty.
And if you aren't familiar with Psalm 90, this is the one psalm in the entire book that was written by Moses. And I wish we had had time to just dig into that psalm last week as we looked at Moses, but we thought this was a good starting point for this morning. That psalm starts out, Moses writes, "Lord, you have always been our refuge. Our ancestors made you their home long ago, before the mountains were born, before you fashioned the earth and filled it with life, from ages past to distant futures, you are truly God." And I think this is important for us to keep in perspective because we saw this with Job a couple weeks ago. This idea that, Job gets this picture of God and realizes that he doesn't know why he's suffering, but he knows that God is in control and that God is good. And so that's enough to have that faith. And so we need to start with that faith this morning as we dig into our story. We've entitled it One Day at a Time. And we're going to look at some lessons from the life of Naomi. So what do you remember from the story of Naomi? And this is, for most of you probably familiar, we're talking about the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. What do you remember about Naomi?
I remember how developed a relationship with Ruth and the process that it took for all this to fall in line and Boaz to be kind to him and how that evolved into a storyline of a blessing later down the road.
That's right, yeah. And we're going to dig into that story today where, you mentioned it starts with this relationship with Ruth, and then Boaz comes in, and so we're going to get through all that. Yeah, absolutely. What else do you remember about Naomi? She was willing to follow her husband to a foreign land, yeah. We'll get into that, because not just any foreign land, but Moab. She changed her name to Bitter, Mara, yes. And that's how she felt. She had her emotions right there on her sleeve. Anything else you remember about Naomi? Paul? Yeah. Yep, Job version 2. And it's funny, you look at Job was very, very wealthy and he lost a lot. One could argue Naomi doesn't lose as much, but she lost everything just like Job did. She didn't have as much wealth to start out with, but she lost everything. Yes.
Through a descendant, she is in Christ.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, she's in Christ's genealogy, one of just a few women that are mentioned in his genealogy. And again, well, this is Ruth. But yeah, Naomi's in the chain though now, yes. Yeah, which is awesome. So some of these things we talked about. Now, we're not going to read these first few verses, but the book of Ruth, not unlike Job, it just opens with a bang. There's a famine in Judah. They're from Bethlehem, ironically, means house of bread, and there's a famine. So they flee, and of all the places to go, they go to Moab. A little brief history of Moab. Moab and Israel did not get along. This dates back. So Moab's origins are from Lot, from an incestuous relationship with his daughters after Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. That's where Moab started. When Israel was wandering through the desert, Moab did not help them out. So because of that, they were kind of like cursed. And then on top of that, if you remember the whole thing with Balaam and the donkey and that whole thing where they're trying to curse Israel and Balaam just won't do it. It was after all that, though, that they had the Moabite women come in amidst the Israels and get them to sin by seducing them and getting them to worship foreign gods, to worship Baal. So there's this history between Israel and Moab where the Moabites are bad people. I mean, we were kind of joking. That'd be like for us as a Christian, if things were getting rough, we're like, you know what, I'm going to go to Vegas. I'm going to work the casinos to try to keep my family afloat. It's, kind of like on that level maybe for us today. But you're fleeing God's presence, and of all the places to go, you're going to Israel's pretty much sworn enemy seeking refuge. And in the process, what was that? They are, going back to Lot and Abraham. They are, yes. So they get to Moab. Elimelech, who's Naomi's husband, dies. And then if the verses are chronological, which we kind of think they are, it's shortly after that their two sons marry these Moabite women. Israelites marrying foreigners was forbidden. But they did it. They married two girls, Ruth and Orpah. And then after living in Moab for 10 years without any other children, grandchildren, Naomi's 2 sons die. So now she's lost her husband, she's lost both of her sons, and all she has are these 2 daughters-in-law who are these Moabite women who are really not welcome in Israel. And so it says there, Naomi was left alone without her husband and 2 sons.
And so she finds herself in this place, and we've entitled this Nowhere to Go But Home. And in verse 6 of Ruth 1, it says, she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. Now, I found it interesting in some ways that here in the fields of Moab they heard. And so word had traveled in some way. So it said in the fields of Moab, the chatter was that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. And so she believes it's a good time for her to go back home. But think about where she's at this particular point in time. Think about all that has happened. She's in a foreign land. She's lost her son. She's lost her husband. How would you describe her emotional state? If you could try to put yourself into her shoes here at this point. How's her emotional state? And also maybe, how do you think her faith is doing? Probably shaky. Probably shaky. She's really on uncertain footing. Yeah. Bitter. Very much so. We made this play, we thought it would work, and it just has not worked at all. And I'm left here all alone. And I've got 2 daughters-in-law, but I'm here all alone. So very isolated, very bitter, probably very shaky in terms of faith. Any other thoughts, how she might be feeling? Ken?
Yeah, she said it was all God's fault.
All God's fault. Yeah. She's been punished. It's not out of the way to think that there's justification to that. You read almost every commentator, and they all feel like the plight that the family endured here was because they went to Moab, and that Elimelech and the 2 sons died as a result of that. The commentators are pretty harsh around that, and the fact that they left God's sort of care in Israel and went across to Moab. Other thoughts on how she might be feeling? What did I do to deserve all this? So yeah, even though she might be able to. Yeah, that's where we go, right? Is what did we do to deserve all this, Jay?
Yes. There's a problem that we have today when a lot of younger children and younger adults abandonment. We were abandoned.
Okay, we were abandoned. We were left alone. I've been outside of God's care in some way. And so we begin.
Turn your back on God, where'd you go?
Yep. So there's this thought that goes on. And then if we look at the case here, I mean, she's 3 widows together, helpless, no heir, helpless. Naomi has nothing to offer her daughters-in-law, so she pushes them to stay in Moab. And we know a little bit about that story as we work through this in chapter 1. And she also shows great love for her daughters-in-law, but we've added in here, but maybe little faith as she works through this, because she just really doesn't quite know what to do, and she continues to try to isolate herself and to go it alone.
Yeah, I mean, she even tells them to go back to their families and their gods in Moab. And so Orpah heeds her advice, because again, she tells them, we're hopeless. I have no heir. I have nothing to give you. I'm a widow. If you come with me, you're hitched with me. I'm cursed by God, essentially, is what she's feeling right now. So if you hitch your wagon with me, you also are going to be cursed. So she tells him to stay. Orpah does. But then we see here in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, but Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Now, I find it kind of funny that we see these vows here, this commitment from her. It appears in a lot of wedding ceremonies. But what we forget is this is a daughter-in-law talking to her mother-in-law. That's not something that we see very often at weddings. But it's powerful, that commitment. And you see there, when you see the word Lord in your Bible in all caps, that's referring to Yahweh, God's covenant name. So we see that she's calling God by his covenant name that he revealed to Israel. So she's not just referring to him like, yeah, you're God, like, oh, whatever. Like, she knows Yahweh.
You know, she didn't say your Lord, she said the Lord. And it would seem that maybe her mother-in-law had influence over her rather than these foreign gods to the Lord.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, she seems to have good theology. So why do you think Ruth was willing to give up everything to follow Naomi? And really, the questions we're looking about Naomi is, what does this tell us about Naomi? She was probably a very good mother-in-law. Yes.
She treated her as a daughter, really.
She treated her as a daughter. Yeah. I mean, she's willing, Ruth is willing to leave her own family, parents, mother, father, and all the hope in that culture that she would have to follow Naomi. Yeah. Oh, Paul? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and as she tries to talk him out, I mean, I agree. I think, she kind of tells, like, you guys are from Moab. You're not going to be welcome there. It's like, my plight is bad enough, but bringing a foreigner into Israel, especially from Moab, but they still follow her because they have that attachment, that family, which I think is incredible. And I want to keep this perspective as we see Naomi, you mentioned that she said, call me bitter. And it's easy to read into this that she's just this bitter old woman who's had a rough life. But apparently she was such a loving mother-in-law that Ruth was willing to give up everything to follow her. So I think we need to see that character in her as we continue reading the story. So as it continues, they go back to Israel. They go back to Judah. And when they get there, the people recognize Naomi. And the name Naomi means pleasant, beautiful, pleasant. It's and so when she comes into town, the people are like, wait, are you Naomi, the one that left? And remember, when she left, she was married and had 2 sons and all sorts of hope. People were probably like, oh, Moab is like, oh, yeah, the harvest is great or whatever. We're going to make it, strike it rich in Moab or whatever. She comes back alone, and the people see her, and she says, don't call me Naomi anymore. Don't call me pleasant. Call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? She's in a bad place. She feels like God is like Job, like God is attacking me and she doesn't understand why. In Job, we get that heavenly preface of what's going on. We don't see that with Naomi. We can assume that this was judgment for going to Moab, but we don't know that. We also don't know if Naomi had any say in the matter. It may have been all Elimelech, and she might have been the whole time saying, no, we can't leave God's presence. We can't leave God's blessing. But she had no choice. We don't know that. But what we do know is that she feels like the Lord is persecuting. And it's interesting, she uses, again, all caps, the word Yahweh, but she's also using the word Shaddai, which we translate as Almighty. And by using that term, it's showing that she understands that God is sovereign. She knows that God is in control of everything. She knows that her circumstances, everything that's happened has been ordained by God's providence. So she has that good understanding, but she doesn't know why. She doesn't know why she's being treated like this, and she feels horrible. Now, another thing, too, to keep in mind of just the depths of despair that they're in, and we talked about this with Moses last week, but that culture back in that time was what we would call an honor-shame culture. And it's this idea that, unlike today where we're very individualistic in our thinking, and if I feel like I'm a good person, that's enough. I know I'm a good person. But in an honor-shame culture, it's very much a group mentality. So your honor, your worth as a person is determined by your standing in society, whether you're viewed as a trustworthy, honest person, or whether people view you as an outcast or as bad or immoral, things like that. And so as she's returning, not only does she no longer have a husband, she no longer has sons, and they didn't have sons. That means that right now, her family line ends. And your name, your family was everything. And that's, again, something, it's hard enough to think of a widow that just, maybe she doesn't have the strength to go out and work the fields, but her honor is gone. And not only that, but she's coming back with a Moabite daughter-in-law, which tells everybody that her sons went off and married foreign women, which, again, would have been shameful at the time. So she's coming back into this cultural setting where she has no hope, no heir, shame on the family, and everyone can see it. And she can feel the eyes of everyone looking at her and judging her as she's walking home. And again, as it mentions there, the intermarriages with foreigners were forbidden. This would have been scandalous. But here she is.
And so Ruth 1 ends with this. Naomi returns, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. So we have the setup here, and sometimes you just roll right through this book, and it seems like, hey, there's a plan, it's going to work, it's all fully known. But I think the biggest thing that we saw as we looked at this story here specifically is how Naomi at least just kept moving. Once she ended up in this difficult situation, she kept moving someplace, almost looking for a way to have hope happen. And didn't really know the plan. And if you think about what Ruth must have felt here as well, as they came together into town, she heard Naomi say, hey, call me bitter now. And now Ruth's going, wow, okay, this is who I'm stuck with, or who I chose to stick with, and I'm going to support her. But now we're really in a society that we're ostracized, and we're marginalized. We're on the edge of society, and so she probably feels in some ways glad that she's there to help. But at some days, I'm sure Ruth sort of felt, wow, I had my parents and I had that family I could have stayed with, but I chose to go with Naomi. But they're two widows in this agrarian patriarchal society. They don't really have a plan, but they need food. They know they need food. They're aware that they need food. And so Ruth then goes out with a little bit of instruction from Naomi, but doesn't really know where to go. But Ruth just heads out to glean and ends up in Boaz's field. And as we know from the story, if you read through it, Boaz had heard of her and the way she had cared for her mother-in-law. And that already Ruth was gaining great respect. And then in Ruth 2, as we begin to continue reading through this, we see here starting in verse 10 and 12 a little bit more about the story.
Yeah, so after Boaz initially shows some kindness and says, hey, I know who you are, stay in my field, I'll take care of you, Ruth falls on her face, bowing to the ground, and says to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner? Again, she knows her place. She knows that just going into the fields is dangerous for a woman all by herself, let alone a foreigner. And Boaz's reply to her in verse 12 is, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And I think that's one of the beautiful pictures we see here is when things hit rock bottom for Naomi and for Ruth, they go back to God's blessing. They go back, they seek refuge under God's wing. They don't know what's going to happen. They know that the circumstances are dire, but they go back to where they know God's presence is. They go back to Israel, and they seek refuge in God's wings. Yep.
Right, and we are doing a lot of that today and stuff about, I heard it in the other lesson I got part of, tangibility, what you can see, touch, and smell.
Yeah, the things that you can see, touch, and smell in this world.
Tangibility.
The tangible, yeah, and she's getting tangible results here too in the form of all this grain and everything. The other thing too that, when you think about Boaz's generosity, and you think of kind of the role reversal here, where here you have this widow going out into the field, and he's telling her, hey, stay with my women, just work, go in, wherever in the field you want to go, and if you need water, just go get water that the men have drawn. So here you have this foreign woman who's having water served to her by Israeli men. Like that's not the way it's supposed to work. It's supposed to be the other way around, where, in this time, And I think we forgot to mention at the beginning, but this takes place in the time of the Judges, which is not a great time for Israel. But this is a time when, the people of Israel had, when they took the land, they had servants, foreigners that were serving them. And here you have Boaz flipping this around and saying, no, as long as you're in my field, I'm going to take care of you. My people are going to serve you. And it's just this incredible picture of generosity. So as the story continues, Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. So some of the commentaries I read, depending on how that was measured, was around 30 to 50 pounds of barley. So you think of like the largest sack of flour you can buy at Costco. That's what we're talking about here.
We thought about bringing some weights or something today
Yeah.
to make it really apparent, but Ruth had some ability to move some weight.
She was a strong woman. She carries this home. So she takes it up, went to the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. Because not only did Boaz say glean in the fields, but at lunchtime, he said, hey, come on over. Here's some bread, oil, some toasted grain. So he fed her. He took really, really good care of her. So she even had leftovers she gave to Naomi. And then her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? You can almost hear like the giddiness in her voice. I mean, Ruth has been gone all day. It says that she came back around sunset. Naomi's probably been terrified because who knows what could have happened to her. She could have been attacked. She could have been beat, kidnapped as a servant, a slave. Who knows? But she finally shows up. It's late. And probably expecting maybe if she's got a little bit of barley so they can have a meal the next day. But she comes in with this Costco-sized sack and just like flops it on the table. And she's just like, what just happened? Where did this come from?
Yeah, it's a big haul. And then in the second part of 19, she tells her mother-in-law where she had been, and the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And then all of a sudden Naomi's like, wow, this man is a close relative of ours and one of our redeemers. And so not only has she had a huge haul, but she had found herself in an absolutely perfect field for gleaning, not just from safety's sake, but also because it's someone that could redeem Naomi and Ruth's name. So if you think about this now, and think about, Jeff talked about how Naomi was probably wondering all day long, and I don't know whether she heard some dragging going on, or whether she heard some grunting as Ruth was carrying this big load of barley in, but it was certainly a lot more than she could have imagined. And then she has this realization of where she ended up. How do you think Naomi's feeling now? How do you think her emotional state is? And contrast that again, how she started off when she got there by saying, my name is Mara, and just call me bitter from here. But how do you feel? What do you think she's feeling right now? Yes. Okay. She must have been amazed, just stunned. Okay, what else? Much more hopeful. A feeling like it might turn. Not quite yet willing to go all the way there, because we kind of reserve ourselves sometimes, think, it might just turn. And sometimes when we're in a bad spot and someone says, hey, I think it might be turning, we usually say, no, well, it's not turning. It's not going to turn yet. But sometimes we're that one, the late reserve in terms of our opinion on that. Other thoughts? Yeah, Mary? Yeah, so it starts to turn positive.
Still in many countries today, when a woman marries, she goes to the father's house. And so Ruth has been in this father's house in Moab, and now she's still in the father's house when they go back to Israel. And when she realizes a kinsperson is there, wow, the father's house is still taking care of us.
Yeah.
So that's got to be part of it too.
this feeling that there's still some care going on because I'm in the Father's house. Any other thoughts here, Ken?
So before, Naomi was blaming God for all her problems, even though a lot of her problems were her fault. But now, when she sees this hope, she is thanking God. It says, when God blessed Boaz, because as it turned out, even though she turned back on God, God didn't turn his back on her. As it turned out, Ruth went just where she needed to go, and there just happened to be a safety net in place that God had provided. God took care of her, provided, and Naomi saw that this was a blessing from God, and so she, in faith, was grateful. It's a turning point of her faith.
It is a turning point of her faith, but God never changed his posture towards her, even though she changed her posture towards him.
Which is important for us to remember when we find ourselves in problems like Naomi.
Absolutely. Yeah, remembering that God's there and not feel the shame of turning back, that we don't wait too long to turn back. Shannon?
I think it's a parallel to the moment that the prodigal son is hugged by the father, and you have this realization, you thought you were blessed when you went out full, but really you're blessed when you come back empty and you're received by the Father.
All right, excellent point. So you think you're blessed when you go out full, but you realize you're even more blessed when you come back empty because you see the favor that God is able to give to you. Did I get that right? Or okay. All right.
So, I mean, I love the picture as the story unfolds, because when Naomi wakes up that morning, she doesn't even know if she's going to have food that day. And by the end of the day, they have enough food to probably last the two of them for the rest of the year. And not only that, but there's this glimmer of hope that Boaz, as it mentions, is this kinsman redeemer, who, if anyone is going to be able to restore their place in society and restore honor to them, is going to come from one of these kinsman redeemers. And so the chapter closes, it says that Ruth kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So this whole time, Ruth is staying with Naomi. But one thing I think that's interesting is this whole harvest is about anywhere from, my commentaries were saying, around 7 weeks. Could be as long as 3 months. But I think the point it's important to recognize here that the story just kind of trucks along, but this is a lot of time going by, where there's this day where, all of a sudden it's like, hey, there's this hope. But then a day goes by, a week goes by, a month goes by, 7 weeks goes by. And they're still being taken care of. They're still getting food. They're still there. The pantry is filling up. But hope for this Redeemer, it hasn't materialized yet. So, realizing that the harvest is coming to a close, Naomi comes up with a plan.
You can almost see Naomi getting really excited here, and she starts to formulate a plan as she thinks through. Okay, I think I've got an idea here, but they've settled into this daily pattern of going out to the field and coming back, and so there's a daily life pattern here for maybe 2 or 3 months, and then all of a sudden, because it's ending, Naomi starts to think through some things, and she says, Naomi, her mother-in-law, says to her, to Ruth, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. And when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, and go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say, I will do. So this is her mother-in-law's plan. And if you really try to put yourself in this culture, what you might know about the culture, and then think to yourself, okay, so what could go wrong with this plan? And what exactly is Naomi trying to accomplish? So could anything go wrong with this plan? What do you think could go wrong? Boaz could reject her. Yeah. An even greater shame could come from this. What else? What could go wrong? Okay, wrong place, wrong time.
Uncover the wrong feet.
Uncover the wrong feet. James?
It looks like she's on what they go on sometimes, and those times they go on a quest or discovery. They're trying to discover something, reach out and find something, and she's following directions and all. And the father, the father in the New Testament, the father and his two sons, and how Christ refers to his father, and in his father's house are many mansions, and the blessings come through and from the father.
Yep. Yes. She could be seen as an immoral woman. Yeah. Yeah. A Moabite. Okay, here. What did you expect bringing a Moabite into this world?
Even in the Middle East today, if a woman did that, she could be killed.
Yeah, she could be killed, even in the Middle East today. So there's great risk to this plan, but Naomi feels like this is a necessary risk and an appropriate risk. And if you think about it, she's betting on Boaz's character. She's betting that she knows something about this man and the way he's going to react, and that he's an honorable man. Especially the way, yeah. And we have a growing 3 months worth of character building, that consistency, that he never withheld his favor or took away his favor from Ruth.
Yeah, and we don't know what's going on in Boaz's head these 7 weeks,
Yeah,
if
we
he's
don't.
thinking about this or not, about this possibility of redeeming. He mentions that there's another kinsman redeemer that's closer than he is, so maybe he's just staying back and giving this person the opportunity to step in. But because Ruth makes this bold move, and because Ruth goes in there, he tells her, he's like, you know what? I'm going to honor this, and by the end of the day, we're going to resolve this. I'm going to go find the other kinsman redeemer, and we're going to solve this problem. So he tells Ruth. So then Ruth goes back to Naomi and relays everything that happened, which is kind of funny. She shows up with another big old, haul of barley and wheat.
Yeah.
And Ruth says to Naomi, hey, Boaz says, don't go home empty-handed to your mother-in-law. So we see through this whole thing, this isn't just Boaz saying, hey, this Moabite woman's, pretty attractive. Like this is all about his concern, his loving kindness towards this family. And so Naomi tells Ruth, she says, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. So they have faith in his character that he's going to do what he says. And so as the story closes, Boaz goes that morning, he finds that other kinsman redeemer, he calls him in, calls the elders in and says, hey, Naomi came back, her land is available, you're the redeemer, you have the right to redeem it. And he's like, yeah, I'll take the land. And he's like, by the way, if you take the land, you also got to take Ruth.
Take the land, but not the women.
And he's like, ooh, I can't do that. So he's like, it's yours. So right there and then they settle it. And Boaz says, I will redeem the land, I will redeem Naomi, and I will take Ruth as my wife. And so then you have Naomi, this picture of her being blessed and restored, redeemed through her daughter-in-law, this Moabite woman. We see a son being born, and now we learn through the genealogy that this will be David, King David's grandfather. And so that puts Naomi, Boaz, Ruth, all in David's line and ultimately Jesus' family lineage. So Naomi is redeemed, honor is restored, and hope is renewed.
Yeah, and I want to read this Ruth 4:14 to 17, because this is after the birth of the child, and the women around Naomi give her tribute. But I want to go back to the gate here a second, because we have a little bit of time, and I wanted to cover this because Jeff and I thought this was very fascinating. So if you look at the blessing that the elders give to Boaz, it's quite a contrast to this blessing, and we'll unpack this a little bit for you. In verse 11 of chapter 4, all the people who are at the gate and the elders say to Boaz, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So they're attributing and saying, hey, your household is going to be a lot now like Rachel and Leah, and may it be just like Perez and Tamar. And you had a little bit of history on that.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of an interesting story to call back to, because if you're not familiar with that story, Judah, so one of the 12 tribes, Judah himself, he gave Tamar to one of his sons. And his son didn't want to have a child with Tamar, so he refused. And he died, God's judgment. So in that culture, with this whole idea of the kinsman redeemer, it was the brother's responsibility to then take on that mantle, kind of like what Boaz is doing here, of bearing a son so the family name could continue. Well, Judah's second son doesn't do it, he dies. So now he's got a third son, and he's afraid that if he gives his third son to Tamar, that God's going to kill his third son and cut off his line. So Tamar poses as a prostitute and winds up having a kid with Judah. So she kind of uses this whole, horrible circumstance, Judah's inability to act, but God has pity on Tamar and gives her a son, Perez, who continues the line. And again, that's also in David's lineage. That's also in Jesus' lineage. And it's interesting to me because the people are calling it out, and on the surface for us in our culture, that's just such a horrible story. We read that story and we're like, no, that's not a blessing. Why would you invoke that in a blessing? But it's another picture of God looking down on someone, in this case Tamar, having mercy and pity on her, and through horrible human circumstances, blessing her and redeeming her and restoring her honor when Judah was unwilling to do it and when Judah was unwilling to trust God. And so in this case, we have this beautiful story, a much, much better story. But we have another story of God using circumstances to redeem someone. And so, yeah, we just thought that was kind of interesting that in that blessing, like, why on earth would they invoke such a horrible story? But it's that parallel of God redeeming what man has turned into a horrible situation. Ken?
Thank you, Jim. That's a great comment. We have a saying now when somebody's really smart that they're playing chess while everyone else is playing.
Yes.
And we see that's what God's doing here. This happened at the time of the judges, and then you get the plan and the genealogy of the greatest king of Israel. So you're moving from judges to a good king, and that God's at work behind the scenes when Naomi says, God's abandoned us completely. It's all, everything is all his fault.
Yep.
Well, God's playing chess while we're all playing checkers.
Right.
And, that's, you wonder with all the young people today, what's God about? It would be good for us to look at it with the eyes of faith to see that, to remember that God is still God.
Yep. Absolutely. Do you have a comment, Dan?
I just think that no matter what the circumstances, whether things are bad or you have a pandemic or all, God's going to be glorified in all.
Oh, that's right.
Because like Ken said, it's his plan, not our plan.
Yep.
And so what we need to be looking for in every circumstances is how is God involved in this to encourage me to be faithful.
That's right.
And of course, the elders didn't quite know here where they were going to, where things were going to end up. So I think the blessing was kind of just like, it was, to my opinion, it was kind of an okay blessing. But it seemed like this though, now in retrospect, is the amazing one from the women, because they say to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Now that's quite a tribute. Now that Ruth is more than 7 sons would have been. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So I think it's fascinating to me that a book entitled Ruth, that's about Ruth, is actually closes with Naomi. And that's a great part of this story. And I think it's a great story of hope at a breaking point where Naomi really helped Ruth come along with her, or Ruth made the choice, but then God was there all along to make something really, really good happen, which is recorded in Matthew and in the genealogies, and shows that this whole thing was a redemptive power, and Naomi rides along right in the middle of this as if she was the involved as the mother of it all, which is really cool.
Yeah. So as we close, just a few things that we want to draw from this. Again, just trying to keep the intent of the class to try to find hope in the circumstances that we're in right now, and also to help others find hope. And so some of the things, like, it amazes me, especially some of the stories we've looked at in this one. If you read through the story, there are no miracles in the way that we think of miracles. The grain didn't just appear when they woke up. God is using people to act out the goodness and everything that plays out here. But I think that makes the story a lot more accessible for us. You can look at Moses and be like, come on, his face was shining. He was in the presence of God. Of course he was, a very humble person. But you don't see any of that here. This is just God working through his people and doing great things and taking care of his people. And again, kind of furthering that point, it's people that are providing God's care. God had a plan for Naomi to redeem Naomi. It was done through Boaz. Again, Boaz didn't have an angel come down in the middle of the night and say, go do this. He was just doing his thing, having his fields, his crop, harvesting barley. And he just, in the goodness of his heart, when he sees the plight of these women, he reaches out to them, and then things happen. But it starts from that. And we like this. We wanted to tie that back to James 1:27. That's where the passage that says that pure and undefiled religion is this. And it talks about taking care of orphans and widows. And again, that's something for us today. We need to understand that. We are God's hand and feet. We can sit around here, look at the state of the world, and pray, yeah, God, you should do something about that. We are his answer. Amen. So let's see that in this story. And then also this idea that, Naomi finds herself in Moab. She's got these Moabite daughters, and she could have easily just given up, rolled over, and stayed there. But when she reached that breaking point, she recognized that she needed to backtrack. And sometimes we can make a lot of decisions, and we can get in that mindset where we're just like, I got to see this through. But when we realize that we have wandered from God's provisions and we're outside of God's blessing, we can't be afraid to backtrack and say, you know what, I made a mistake. I never should have come here. And go back to God, go back to God's blessing and his provision, regardless of the consequences. Again, her coming back, a widow with no sons, with a Moabite daughter-in-law, would have been very, very scandalous and uncomfortable, but she did it. And then keep moving. Even when you don't know what God's plan is, even when you don't have hope, it started out with just that decision, we need food today. And so go find food. So keep moving. When you hit that wall, you hit that breaking point, just take it one day at a time, one step at a time.
Okay, quick comment, James, I'm going to close.
Okay, does this have anything to do with what is written in the wisdom that does the same fountain yield both sweet water and bitter water?
Yeah, so coming out of, that's James, right? Sweet water and bitter water. So you've got this, these good things that can happen from people helping, and that's kind of how we wanted to close today is, how can you help? You see Boaz helping, you see Ruth coming together with Naomi to help. So people around you, how might you be able to help this week? And then just like Naomi and Ruth kept moving and kept doing things, what kind of movement do you need to be doing this week? How do you need to keep moving maybe to build hope even in your own life, or maybe to help somebody find hope? We wanted to close with this quote from Luther, which is, everything that is done in the world is done by hope. I really loved that quote that Jeff ran across. Everything that's done in the world is done by hope. And that's because we serve a great God, and a God who will never turn his back on us and always offer us a chance for redemption. So let's close with a prayer. Almighty God, we thank you for this time. We thank you for this powerful story of Naomi and just how Ruth stuck with her and Boaz was the Redeemer, and how it's part of your plan for David's birth and eventually Christ. And Father, we are always amazed at how you work. And much like Naomi, some days we are just stunned at the things you have done and the situations you have placed us in or the people around us that has caused blessing. We just pray we'd recognize those moments more often and that we would ever give you credit for the things that go on in our lives, and that you'd give us hope in the midst of breaking points and in the midst of difficulties but that we would keep moving and that we would be willing to go back to our roots if necessary, even if it's embarrassing, to start over and begin anew. Thank you for being the God of starting over. In Jesus' name, amen.
Unchangeable I am, the King of glory.